Hello. Hello. Is this going? It's going, right? The beeps are when I go.
No,
off
I heard no ba-boom.
No, you can hear it. It's happening. You got a Seinfeld riff?
Yeah, I got it.
Hello, this is Raphael Bob Waxberg. I'm here with
Peter A. Knight.
Peter A. Knight. This is season 1, episode 4 of BoJack Horseman. This episode is called Zoe's and Zelda's.
Yes.
With the diareses over the E in Zoe's. Not an umlaut. It's a different thing.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
The diareses
that one
are used when you have two vowels next to each other that might be read as Zoes, but you want to indicate that it's two different syllables.
Wow.
So I never understood why Zoe had that, but then I learned.
Diareses.
With the diareses. Although often I feel like when I'm writing out the title of this episode, I do not include the diareses.
When I am writing out the title of this episode, they're telling me in the park, go home.
No, yes, but you put it in, and so I said, okay, her name is Zoe. ...
Loving Herb's jacket, by the way.
Herb Kazaz, the introduction of... So this is the beginning of a few things. We kind of get into the Herb story a little more, which becomes a much bigger part of the season. We're kind of beginning to indicate that this show is more serialized than perhaps you would know from just watching the first 3 episodes. Herb is mentioned in the last episode, and here we see him for the first time. We're also really underlining BoJack and Todd's relationship here. I remember your original title for this episode was For the Love of Todd. You love a good wordplay title.
I do.
But I really wanted to emphasize the Zoe and Zelda part of the episode, and so that's why we changed the title to that. This is the first episode ever written for the show that I did not write. Peter, you were also the first writer that I hired to be on the show. Do you remember?
I remember very well.
Yeah.
I remember the first I watched what you guys had a short. You made a
we had like a pilot presentation.
And I was transfixed. I was watching it in the airport on the way to go see my mom for Thanksgiving, and I thought, this I am interested in, and I couldn't quite tell why. I knew I just wanted to go into it. It was the look. It was the way that there's no talking about the fact that we have a horse that's, there's just, everything was sublimated. And so I was dying to, we met by Skype.
Yeah, because you were away for Thanksgiving. And I think we had to hire people fast. It was like, we can't wait for Peter. I think you had another offer out too. I think that's what it was too. It's like, we got to, if you want Peter, you got to talk to him while he's away. And we got to plug him in.
Yeah, and I talked to Steve and Noel and Raphael. And then so when I came in, I knew that Raphael had only done a couple of, you'd been a staff writer on 2 shows, and I certainly knew that there was an immense talent at work, but I don't think it was particularly clear whether you were going to be fully comfortable running the show.
Yeah.
And so we entered into this arrangement that was sort of like, come in, and you might be sort of you might need to be.
We'll see how much hand-holding Raphael needs.
Yeah. And after about day 3, the answer was not any.
Okay.
There was a little, I remember sort of, I think, emphasizing outlines and a couple of procedural, three-act structures.
You really set the tone for how we still write the show now several seasons later. Because I didn't, what... Do we do outlines? Again, you said, I love doing outlines. I want to do outlines. And like, all right, well, you're the first person writing an episode. It wasn't me. So let's see your outline. And that kind of became the standard.
And that is very, as far as like everybody learns what they learn in a different way. But I have been, doing it for a long time. My first, going back to Sweet Valley High in 1996.
Yeah.
You were writing an outline.
Right.
And I remember saying to the showrunner, I don't really write outliners. And
really?
And she
As
said,
a staff writer?
She said, oh, absolutely, you're writing an outline. Here are 3 of them. And my partner and I didn't like run that by my partner, but I remember saying, I don't really work from outlines, and she disabused me of that right away.
Yeah.
And then I came to realize that's truly the valuable document that tells you whether you've got...
Well, I think especially when you're trying to communicate to a showrunner what the story is, it's very helpful before you go off to script to be like, is this the story? And then also, some networks require outlines. Netflix, thankfully, does not. All our outlines are internal. Right? Like,
well, yeah,
it's just for us. It's not for.
I didn't. I hadn't realized. This is a sideline. conversation, but yeah, who wants to see outlines and why,
Right.
and when do they want to see them? And
Yeah, and it's possible actually thinking back, maybe Noel and Steve wanted to see outlines, or that might have been for their benefit as well, to kind of keep tabs on what was happening, what was coming.
there are definitely showrunners that don't do the outline process at all with the network. That's just a communication of like the story is going to be in this area.
Right, and that's what we do. So that we'll come up with a story, we'll write an outline. Often now it's after the script is already written, I'll call Netflix and give a pitch through the episodes. They know what to expect. And then like a couple days later, they'll get the script. And that the process kind of came about because that's how we made the show. Like I think every room kind of finds its own process, right? Like it builds off of what came before and what was adjusted to. But I've been in rooms, going back to what you said, where there is a creator and they bring the showrunner in, and there's some tension, and the creator is pushed off, and it's just that person's show. So that could have been you, presumably.
I had had somebody engage with me in bad faith in that way. I've always had my guard up for if you're coming into somebody else's tent.
Yeah.
All the rules you get make sure you are invited in. That you're not touching the ball until you've been invited to touch.
Right. You don't want to feel like you're pushing somebody else out.
Oh, it would be anathema.
Yeah.
And yes. Underline.
And I don't think anyone. I mean, I always assumed that I would be running the show and would not be pushed off of my own show. So I don't.
It wasn't pushed off. It was just kind of like, is this brilliant idea guy also able to do the sort of the nuts and bolts of making sure that the production line is...
And I'm still barely sure that I do, but I do enough. I have enough confidence.
I think that's the dirt, and I think you have great people around you. Like as your producers, and I think that is able. They're able to take the part of you that needs to be just.
And I think the great way about how this show was put together is that I felt as a young first-time showrunner very protected, and then I had Noel and Steve who were looking out for me, and then I staffed the show with people like you who had more experience, who knew how a room works and how to do it, and that was incredibly helpful that first year to have such a robust, strong, thoughtful room. With you as the number two, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I never really.
It's not an official title, number two.
It's also not like there are things that a number two does that you never like asked me to do or needed me to do, and so I just.
But so for this episode, because it was the first one I wasn't writing, it strayed the most of the first 4 episodes from what the original plan was, because when we started the season, we had like a 12-episode outline that I had come up with, and here's what I want every episode to be about. And some of the episodes hew to that very closely, and some have like shifted and moved around in different ways. And for this one, the B story, which is the Diane, Mr. Peanut Butter Wayne story, was very much in there from the beginning. And I was really married to that, and that was very important to me. And this Todd rock opera story was all from you and the room. Like this was not part of the original outline, right?
I remember this was like so we had the first 2 episodes written, and then you had the third.
And I was writing the third one.
And I said, should we put the third one on the board? Because there were some things I was like, does this one I kind of had some story notes, and then I said, well, what's our schedule? We pulled up the schedule. I was like, you know what? Let's just go to the and we went to the 4th, and because you had the Zoes and you had all this really like down to very specific dialogue, but then there were these gaps.
What is the A story?
and I remember kind of going like, does Todd write a rock opera? And you go, yep. And because I've always found rock opera to be a funny thing to make jokes about. I've done it in Big Wolf on Campus. I mean, like I've always like been joking about rock operas. Then last summer I finished an actual.
You actually wrote your own. You finally worked through your own thing.
Part of this was that was like, it's funny when a character wants to write a rock opera.
I like you like dipping your toe in the water. Like, is it funny when someone writes a rock opera, or is it like kind of cool
or sad? I mean, like what is it?
I feel like this kind of joke we don't do so much anymore. I think like early on, I feel like I had a lot of ideas of like the raunchiness of what an adult animated show should be, that now I feel more secure in my own abilities to feel like we don't have to do that if we don't want to. And I think there are other people who are more natural with those kinds of jokes where it feels more a part of the show. But these are your songs too, these rock opera songs.
Well, now hold on a second. I mean, I put some of these lyrics out.
I think you kind of noodled something on a guitar.
Yeah, I did.
And then we played it once for Aaron Paul, and then he kind of did his own version, and then Jesse had to write music around what Aaron Paul warbled.
But I liked these scenes where this was where you wanted BoJack making sure that he was invested in the story. Right? Yeah, that's.
Oh yes, you wanted to show that he was paying attention.
Yeah, the cave of swollen dreams and forgotten remembrances or something.
The Turbidians are a loyal people. They just
And this episode is kind of the proper introduction of Todd.
Yeah.
And Aaron is so good at this character and fills him with such life and silliness. But there's a really, I think, in retrospect, I don't know how intentional this was, but there's a structure to the first season where, the first 3 episodes are really all about BoJack and his past and kind of figuring out who he is. And then starting with episode 4, we kind of have this rondelay where this is about BoJack's relationship with Todd. The next episode is about BoJack's relationship with Diane. The one after that is about BoJack's relationship with Mr. Peanut Butter. And then finally you get to BoJack's relationship with Princess Carolyn. And that ended up being a really great way to build stories out of. And it was a real lesson for me that to build stories out of relationships as opposed to building stories just out of character.
Yeah.
And that when you find those angles or those connections and that's what the story's about, it flows more naturally and is more interesting than just about here's this character versus the world or his opinion about this or his experience here or with this day player.
I think that so much of it is in your head that really story breaking, especially in the early days, was a lot of just sort of fixed, what do you like? Yeah. I'm trying to, because there were things about it that I thought I really had a handle on BoJack. I thought I had a handle on Princess Carolyn. I understood that relationship and its contours and its darkness and energy. I didn't really have a feel for Mr. Peanut Butter. I remember there was a line where he was the guy that's going, Erica, I want to talk to you, but also a sincere person.
Right.
And I remember I brought kind of a long face to you, I'm not sure I'm squaring that. You just went, no, waved me off, no, everybody's going to love Mr. Peanut Butter. Don't worry about it. And,
I didn't try to explain it.
And I swear to God, I never stopped worrying about it since. And yes, he is my favorite character.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it was Mr. Peanut Butter was not in the original pilot presentation. There wasn't room for him in that thing. So I think a lot of the writers couldn't quite picture him in the same way you could picture some of the other characters. So we were kind of creating him, And then I think I had to explain that phoniness when he goes, I want to talk to you. Hey, Erica, and gets distracted immediately, that is a sincere moment for him. And it reads as phony, but kind of the fun of watching him develop over the course of the season is the realization of no, he actually does want to talk to BoJack and then does want to talk to Erica.
Yeah.
He's not being phony. He's just easily distracted and equally enthusiastic about all things.
Right.
Or there's a part of this episode where you really wanted him to discover what Wayne was writing about him and be really upset about that. And I said, no. And I feel like now, because we've kind of shaded him out, we have room for maybe he could be. But at this point in the series, I really wanted to play him. It's he's optimistic, he's excited, he's just happy to be invited to the party. If he did end up reading the story, which doesn't happen in this episode, but he'd be like, wow, the front page of BuzzFeed. He wouldn't.
We missed that. I mean, just while you were talking there, the
ex-girlfriend who comes back later.
Yeah, but isn't that
Yeah.
Yes. She comes back in season
Spoiler.
3. You were saying front page of BuzzFeed is where we'd be if
Mr. Peanut Butter would be excited about that.
Yeah.
That he's, as of now, he's just very enthusiastic about all things. He is unaware or unworried about being a washed-up star. I think especially because we wanted to contrast him with BoJack, and that BoJack is so in his head about all that stuff that we really wanted to play Mr. Peanut Butter as not, and that he's lived in some ways a very similar life to BoJack. I think as we get deeper into their backgrounds, we see their backgrounds are quite different, but as far as career experience and where they are now, they're in a very similar place, and the key difference is Mr. Peanut Butter's attitude versus BoJack's attitude. And so it's really important to me to maintain that and not have Mr. Peanut Butter bummed out by the fact that people think he's a joke. Because either he is unaware of it or just doesn't mind.
It's kind of like Billy Ray Cyrus.
Yeah. He's happy to be
is he a joke? Who could possibly tell him that he is?
Another argument I remember having about this episode is the way that it ends. Do you remember this conversation? That it's the end of this episode right now is this monologue by this guy Wayne about the differences between Zoe's and Zelda's and kind of how it transposes onto everybody and his his thoughts on how we are all kind of stuck being who we are. And the Wayne character, generally his design, I think one of the questions we're trying to answer in this episode is, why is someone like Diane with someone like Mr. Peanut Butter? Because it feels like in some ways maybe she'd be a better match for a BoJack type. And so I think it was helpful to introduce this guy Wayne, who is more on the BoJack side of things, like very cynical about stuff and very, clever, although I don't know how clever he actually is in this episode.
He's biting.
He's biting. He feels like more Diane's type. And we kind of see that he's kind of a douchebag, and like why Diane is not interested in that.
I like that Todd was waiting that whole time
in the closet.
Yeah.
That Mr. Peanut Butter, there's a sweetness to him, even though he doesn't get stuff, right? And that he does come around and get these tickets for Diane to go up and see the Dion Arbus exhibit elsewhere. That there's a niceness there, and I think we buy a little bit of their relationship a little more because of this episode, or in some ways.
I think that's true,
right? And so, but it ended with this monologue from Wayne, and I think you had a real hard time with that structurally, just because it's the B story, it's this day player character, and you at one point said, why are we spending so much time with the guest star who's the ex-boyfriend of our fifth funniest of the main characters on this show? Like, why are we trying to get people to invest in this? And I think there was a real come to Jesus moment where I think you sat me down and you're like, is this a darling that maybe we should kill? Because I understand.
I do remember saying that Zoe's and Zelda's.
Like, I understand that, like, you love this, and I don't want to take anything away from you, but is there a possibility that perhaps we don't need this? Maybe this is a vestigial tale, like, God's where we need to go, and maybe this part of the episode
was
is
I delicate?
You were delicate, yes. You were very polite about it. You weren't bullying me. Like, I felt like, it was very respectful, but it was a little bit like, look, as someone who has a little more television experience than you do, might I suggest that perhaps you don't need this anymore? And I remember feeling very strongly about this, and I think also just as delicately and calmly saying, no, this is important, and this is why I want to do this episode. I think this has meaning for the show and the series and the season, and I think, perhaps this rock opera thing that we're excited about now is not helping us get to this point. But this is the point that I care about. So if our A story is not helping us get here, then we need to change the whole A. I think I said, like, we can throw out everything. We are keeping this monologue. And he said, okay, then.
I remember when you said, it's the reason I want to do the episode. And I was like, that is reason enough. But I would say that half of my...
So this is a very sad cutaway gag that we don't do so much of this anymore. But this is a dark joke about pushing someone out of a nest. And who was that bird character?
Should we stay with her?
Maybe we'll see if she comes back. Apparently she's very close friends with BoJack.
I remember that even in the animatic, watching
her
that
the
bumping around. I like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of because the show is so, I mean, let's just say it's an original. I mean, it's a very fresh and original feeling thing. And part of it was I knew that I was coming in, and part of my job is to do, well, here's how you kind of do it.
Right.
And then but I knew from watching that presentation that a lot of what I was going to be doing was also listening and saying, well, how do I help this guy? How do I get you where you want to be? So it's not like it wasn't a difficult thing to reconcile, but it was just kind of like it was this side and that side. And I was trying to kind of make sure I did a blend of both.
Yeah. And I think, one of the challenges of being a showrunner is communicating your vision to all the people who are working with you and want to help you. And I sometimes understand the instinct to go, no, nobody gets it, just let me do it. Because it's so clear in your head, and sometimes even the stuff you're writing doesn't explain what it is, right? Like, I feel like you could watch or read the first 3 episodes that I wrote for this show and still not have quite the idea of what I wanted to do with it or where it was going, right? And for me, it was very clear what I wanted the show to be.
When you see the first 3 episodes, is it you're like, yep, that is it? Or do you go,
no,
oh, I didn't quite?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that was, the audience reaction speaks to that a little bit too, is that I wanted there to be a surprise of where the season goes, and I wanted it to feel like, oh, it's this kind of thing. This is a great joke. I wanted it to feel like it's this kind of thing, and then it turns into this other kind of thing. But I feel like I was shakier on the kind of thing that the show was pretending to be. And I was much more confident in the kind of show that it actually was, which means that the second half of the season is much more confident than the first half of the season. And I think that is true of most shows. I think the shows kind of find out as they go what they are. But I wish there are moments in these first 4 or 5 episodes where I feel like I'm still pretending, or I'm making the kind of show that I think this is supposed to be, you know, or like what I think an adult animated show is, and like trying to sneak my own thing in. And I wish I was more confident to be like, no, I want to do the show I want to make and not feel like I had to sneak it in. Because I feel like once the show becomes the show that I always wanted it to be, that's when people really started to come around and go, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
Right? And I think I wish I had the confidence from the beginning to be like, I just want to make that great show and not feel like I have to like sneak it through.
Right.
I remember there was a party we went to early on. It was my agent Grant Kessman, his Christmas party.
Your
My former agent, as of now, my former
Mine
agent
too.
Grant Kessman.
Love Grant Kessman.
We were at his Christmas party, and you said this thing to me, which I at the time I took as you meant it as a compliment.
Oh no, I hate hearing these things.
No, you meant it as a compliment, and I took it as a compliment, but I thought the phrasing of it was kind of funny. And let me see if I can remember exactly. It was something along the lines of, you know, I don't always understand what you're going for, but I was thinking recently about that first presentation I saw, and I just loved that so much, and I thought, this guy must know what he's doing.
Yes.
And so I'm just going to go off the premise that you are brilliant and work off of that premise and go from there.
It has not failed me.
I appreciate it.
And I've only now learned the full truth.
That I'm not.
No, that you are in fact.
But I definitely, the unspoken part of that is I currently don't see what you're seeing.
The thing you
but
said,
I'm
the
going
Zoes and Zeldas was
Yeah.
a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
Where it was like, the reason that it was so easy to back down from that is I would just go back to that presentation and how much, I cannot overstate how much I just fell into it, and I just thought, clear anything else, this is what I want to do. And when you feel that way, and you know it's not an accident, it's not like, you know, it was you and Lisa's work, and it was coming, it was all that together.
And Mike and the animators, yeah.
And it was things that I had never, places my mind had never gone.
Uh-huh.
So that when you're telling me that Zoes and Zeldas is the reason to do the episode, rather than going, well, let me tell you how we did it on Sweet Valley High, you know, you kind of go, okay, I'm just taking one step back, and I'm going to say the guy that found the stuff before
He must know something.
is just because I can't see it, you know, yet, and eventually I did, and now people always ask about Zoes and Zeldas still, like if it's, you know, we missed some the Paul as Virgil Van Cleef.
Oh, Paul is fantastic.
Never have I ever, you know.
Yes, certainly I think one of the delights of this first season is all the stuff we gave to Paul and how many amazing voices he found. You know, before we got to the point where we can just get a fancy guest star to play any old role. We're going to get to do this. Paul's here.
I mean, and why?
So funny.
Yeah.
People don't change, Diane. Not really.
Here it is. Here's the monologue.
He's happy and he's carefree and he's loving.
I totally buy it now.
And this also, I think,
Yeah, I bought this early.
this is even more than the Herb flash we get at the beginning of the episode. I think this sequence of this, you know, the reveal of BoJack's betrayal of Todd, I think of as one as the I don't know what the expression is, like the shifts in the season, like you know, this is like as we reveal what kind of show this is. Obviously, the reveal of this is character actress Margot Martindale is a big moment too of like, oh, this is very inside. But the fact that what appears to be a more straightforward plot of like BoJack trying to help his friend and failing, you know, becoming that he sabotages his friend because he doesn't want him to leave the nest, kind of reveals a darkness to this show that maybe you wouldn't expect otherwise.
Well, it also has I think it's a really distinct combination to do an actual betrayal.
Yeah.
But with Margot Martindale as
in
your
a very silly
co-conspirator
way, yeah.
along the subject of your addiction to video games.
Right.
But like the note that hits so true is the betrayal.
Right, and this receipt at the end, which could come back later.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I think also speaks to this, like, oh, I got to watch the next episode now. And that was a big thing for Netflix early on, is they wanted to make sure we were kind of putting these things in
Like
at the end
hooks.
of episodes, which I was resistant to because I again, it felt very not anime. Like, I liked the kind of slow reveal over the course of the season that it was serialized.
But there's also like, guys, we're doing like I'm doing an arc. Like,
Right.
It wasn't.
Yes.
You know,
But I think that was a great example of making that work, of feeling like, ooh, what's going to happen with that? And then, of course, it's not addressed for several more episodes.
But
Then eventually it will be.
Rachel Kaplan, when she was just a
BoJack.
production assistant.
The writer's assistant.
Oh, well, I was the word production. I'm not that good. Shadow Machine.
Shadow
here we are.
Machine, where we are. All right. Thank you.